Hello, and welcome to Everybody's Business. I'm your host, Valerie Hellerman, and today I have two members of the Friends Committee on National Legislation. It's a new committee here in Helena, and I have Tom Butts and Jim Smith as my guests, who will tell us all about FCNL. Hi, Tom. Welcome.
Hi, Valerie. Glad to be here. We're actually part of an FCNL, Friends Committee on National Legislation, advocacy team here in Helena that we started a few months ago. So what's FCNL? Well, that's an organization that was started by the Quakers back in about 1943, a group of first of all, I should say Quaker values include integrity, simplicity, and peace, among others. They've been against war basically since the beginning. They feel that all people are created equal in the eyes of God, basically, and that we are all of and part of God. So with that in mind, a group of Quakers during World War II wanted to consider how in the world they could influence legislation more toward peace, or at least have a say in national legislation promoting peace and justice. So in 1943 that was started. And since then, FCNL, which is based in Washington, D.C., has built a very strong organization of advocates and lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and then all across the country, promoting basically peace and justice in the United States. And so a number of years ago, they began in 2015, they began an advocacy team where people in communities like ours could be informed and participate in and help influence legislation at the local level. We locally could contact our representatives and encourage them to vote for bills that are promoting peace and justice, etc. Some of the key things over the years that FCNL has promoted, believe it or not, back in the 50s, there were a couple of bills that were introduced in Congress to force all young men in the United States to take military training. And FCNL was very strongly against that and promoted defeated that legislation. And people that were there at the time say that it was very much dependent on FCNL. Another thing, they were advocates and very involved in starting the Peace Corps in the early 60s. And they've done that ever since then. They've been amazingly involved in a number of things. So basically, that's it for FCNL, and I think Jim can fill in a little more on where we're at in Helena in the advocacy teams.
Okay, so I just have a question.
Sure.
The advocacy group started in 2015.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's a really positive way of getting the word to Congress, having advocates on site in Washington. Mm-hmm. That's really can you tell us more about the team in Helena?
Well,
Jim?
A group of us got together, sure, Valerie. Thanks for having us here today. A group of us got together back in January, and we met with some people from the FCNL National, and we all agreed to go through some training. They have really good training about how to go about advocacy for the issues that they're interested in. And I think the thing that attracted me to it a lot is that they want you to ground that in your own story. And why are you here? Why is this meaningful to you? And just sort of some sort of abstract political statement that, okay, I've got the slogans and the bumper stickers down now, let's go out and peddle them. It's a thing of what does this mean to me? And there was a couple of dozen people at the training, and out of that, about, I'd say, 8 to 10 of us come together once a week, and we talk about the issues and what we're trying to do. And after the 4 weeks of training and trying to develop, let's call it, for the want of a better word, a little elevator speech, about, a little talk that you could give when you rode an elevator, 2 stories about why you are involved in FCNL and why you're against war and for peace and justice. And so out of that, we've taken up the task of writing letters to the editor and writing our congressmen and Daines, Gianforte, and Tester about different bills that come before Congress. So it's a way for us out here in the hinterlands to sort of push from the other side and help the lobbyists in Washington who are there dealing with members of Congress day in and the different bodies in Washington day in and day out. We're able to sort of reinforce that by saying, hey, this Senate bill is coming up and it's about this particular issue, and we would like you to take into consideration our point of view and vote this way on that bill. I mean, it's not just think about it. We have a point of view about which way the bill should be voted on, and so we're citizen lobbyists. And part of the thing that I think that we all have to do to regain control of this country is to become engaged citizens, engaged in our own democracy. And that's one of the other things that I liked about FCNL is that it's getting us back involved, and it's not just, well, we have our representatives in Congress and they'll do the right thing. Well, the last 70 years have proven that, sorry folks, it didn't quite work that way. So I think that's, and I think it's important if people want to become involved with us, we have a way that you could become involved, and you have to go through the training like we did. That's an important part of it. But we're here, we're all just citizens of Helena. Nobody's paid anybody, and nobody has political aspirations or, we're just trying to make a point.
Great. And how does FCNL communicate with the group?
We have actually, we have different, I guess members in our group have different responsibilities, and one of those is being a communicator. So twice a month, there's essentially right now it's a Zoom meeting with people from all around the country, all these different advocacy teams. I think there's over 100 now. There's one that started in Missoula just a few weeks ago. There's also an active one in Bozeman. We're here in Helena, and there's another in Great Falls. And on that communicator meeting, there are hundreds of people that join that from around the country, and then they generally have somebody, they always have somebody that discusses one of the issues that's kind of top on the list. And so we learn more about the legislation. We can meet the lobbyists online who can bring us up to date with the legislation that's most important at the time and what we can do about that. And then we can bring that back to our team. Also, once a month, there's a meeting online again now for everyone. So last night there was one, and there were well over 200 people from across the country that were there. There was a woman, an Iranian-American journalist, who spoke for probably a half an hour or more about how the U.S. sanctions against Iran are affecting the people on the street in Iran. We can talk about that in a little bit later if we have time, but it was fascinating. And one of the things one of our issues right now is to get the U.S. to ease the sanctions on Iran for humanitarian purposes or reasons. So we can go into that more. And then we had one of the Middle Eastern lobbyists talk to us about exactly things that we can do that are going on this month in Washington that we can have some impact with by writing letters to the editor, by writing letters to our Congress people, and letting them know we're kind of on top of it too. We're watching what's going on, and we encourage them to vote.
So it sounds like these communicator meetings are really helpful and kind of puts you right into the pulse of what's going on in D.C.
Right.
That's important.
Yeah, I think so too.
And Jim, can you tell us, what are the issues that FCNL has identified?
Well, this year, one of the main issue is, but not the only issue, is no war with Iran. in the middle of this pandemic for sure, that's affecting the whole world, what we don't need to be doing is cranking up everything to cause more conflict in the Middle East that's already fallen completely apart. And the ongoing tension there between Israel and Iran and the United States is just making things worse and worse and worse for so many people, whether they're in Iran or if they're in Afghanistan or Syria, the war in Yemen. All of these places are just collapsing because on the health front, because of the lack of the ability to get in the kind of medications they need and the supplies that they need to fight the COVID-19. But at the same time, this ongoing idea that what we need to do is engage in a war and intervention in some other country is, for the most part, it's not even legal under international law. But we've set up this blockade of the country, and the European countries are trying to deal with something there. Since we bailed out of the Iran agreement about the nuclear weapons thing, and theoretically no money can go there, and we've frozen assets and all of that stuff. So it's the person on the street in Iran who suffers, not the elite who are running the government. And the other thing, which I think this woman brought up last night, Tom, is that this just sort of reinforces the hard line element in Iran against the U.S. and against making some kind of progress towards a reconciliation. So it doesn't work.
So just briefly, what are the issues before Congress or the bills before Congress that the FCNL is asking us to support? I know there's, maybe somebody could just talk a little bit about that. Do you have that there, Jim?
Yeah. Well, there's two main bills right now about which are called the No War Against Iran Act. One is the House 5543, and then the Senate bill is 3159. And they prohibits any kind of an obligation or expenditure of federal funds for any use of military force in or against Iran unless Congress has either declared war or enacted specific statutory authorization for such use. And so part of this comes out of the fact that after 9/11, we sort of threw down a bunch of things to the presidency under the War Powers Act that now are haunting us. How do you control this when the Constitution says only Congress can declare war, and yet we've seen president after president since then do things.
So our audience should be aware of these two bills, and it's Senate Bill 3159. Do you know when that's being presented?
Well, I believe that it's in July.
In July?
Yeah.
And the House bill is?
I think concurrent. It's a concurrent kind of thing. They've put the two together. I don't have in front of me who the sponsors of those bills. I do know that there are 37 senators who have sponsored S 3159, but I don't know whether Tester is there or Daines is.
Okay, we have a list that we can put up here to contact your congressman and your senators and your House representative about these bills if you oppose the war in Iran. Now is the time to write and express your feelings about that. And this is one of the things that I find is so wonderful about this organization is that you are alerted to what's being voted on in Congress, and so you really get to play a part. And we have like a month's notice now, so we can get our opinions out to our governance. So Tom, you have anything left to say right now about FCNL? And we'll come back next week and talk a little bit more specifically about some of the issues.
Sure. Let me cover something just for a minute. Every month, we are sent an action sheet for that month that is kind of on top of the agendas here. And so I certainly haven't memorized it all, and it won't take very long. But here's the action sheet for June 2020. It begins, we seek a world free of war and the threat of war, which is actually our entire year's. Yes.
Go ahead.
So in here in general, it says get the facts. It has something about the Congressional Authority and War Powers Resolution, and it goes right into these bills that you're talking about and lists those. It speaks to Iran and the United States and the issues with the sanctions, and then congressional actions on Iran, which Jim spoke of. And then there's an action sheet, take action. What can you do this month? And the key thing this month has to do with the National Defense Authorization Act is actually reauthorized every year, I believe, NDAA. Congress will take that up. And so we're looking at getting wording attached to that will take care of these issues, like no war with Iran, no funding for a war with Iran without congressional approval, things like that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's really good to know. Okay, well, we're going to come back with these two gentlemen next week and talk a little bit about some more specific actions and specific action alerts that the FCNL has put out. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being here, and thank you from Everybody's Business.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thanks, Valerie.